There was a moment, quiet, almost invisible, where they believed they'd won. When you were down, unheard, dismissed, they mistook your silence for defeat. But what they didn't know is that pain doesn't always scream. Sometimes it listens, it learns, it waits. You see, when someone tries to break a soul that was built through struggle, they don't just fail, they create something stronger than they ever anticipated. They create a version of you that rises without noise, without revenge, without theatrics, and yet your very existence becomes their mirror, a mirror that doesn't reflect their triumph but their betrayal, a mirror that doesn't scream justice but delivers it silently, day by day. They thought you'd crumble, but you didn't. And now, the weight of what they did echoes louder in their own minds than any words you could have spoken. That's what haunts them. Not your anger, but your survival. Forged in fire, how your pain became your power. They expected the pain to ruin you. When life collapsed, when the betrayal came from those you gave your heart to, when the lies spread faster than your truth, they were sure it would be your undoing. They saw the shock in your eyes, the stillness in your voice, and they mistook it for weakness. They never imagined that silence could hold so much strength. They thought pain would be the end of your story. But what they didn't realize is that pain doesn't always break. Sometimes it builds, it crafts, it shapes. The suffering you endured did not destroy you. It forged you in fire. And what walked out of that fire was not the broken version they expected, but a soul that had learned how to endure what others would run from. You see, pain is a strange teacher. It doesn't speak in soft lessons. It carves its wisdom into your bones. It demands your attention. It rips away the illusions you once believed in and forces you to see things for what they are, not what you hoped they would be. And when you lean into that kind of pain, when you stop running from it and start listening to it, something shifts. You stop asking, why did this happen to me? And you start asking, what is this here to teach me? That question changed everything, because when you stop seeing yourself as a victim of circumstance and start seeing yourself as a student of experience, your pain transforms. It becomes fuel. It becomes clarity. It becomes power. Not the kind of power that needs to prove itself, but the kind that sits quietly, deeply rooted, unmoved by chaos. And that's the part they never expected. They thought you'd beg, break, lose yourself trying to make sense of what they did, but you didn't. You went inward. You did the hard thing. You sat with your wounds. You bled, not in front of the world, but behind closed doors, in silence, in solitude. And in that darkness, you found a different kind of light, the kind that doesn't flicker when storms come. You stopped pretending to be okay. You let it hurt, you let it teach you, and that pain, that unbearable soul-shaking pain, became your teacher. It taught you who you were when no one was watching. It taught you to separate illusion from truth. It forced you to let go of the fantasies you had about people who were never truly for you. It stripped away your need to be understood and replaced it with the strength to understand yourself. You learned that closure doesn't always come in conversation. Sometimes it comes in acceptance. You stopped needing them to see your worth because you finally began to see it yourself. And now they feel the shift. They may not say it. They may act unbothered, but deep down they know. They sense the quiet power in your presence, the way you no longer flinch at their absence, the way your silence no longer pleads but protects. You stopped chasing validation. You stopped explaining your heart to people committed to misunderstanding it. And that's what haunts them now. Not your revenge, not your rage, but your transformation. The fact that you took the very pain they caused and turned it into wisdom. The fact that you didn't collapse, you evolve. You didn't get louder, you got deeper. And now your existence reminds them of everything they lost. Not because you screamed it from the rooftops, but because your peace is too loud for them to ignore. Your resilience speaks a language their ego can't silence. And maybe they'll never admit it. Maybe they'll pretend like they don't notice. Every time they see you thriving, every time they hear your name in places they thought you'd never reach, every time your strength is spoken of in rooms they aren't in, they're reminded of the role they played in your evolution. Not as heroes, but as lessons. Pain didn't break you, it built you. And that fact alone, spoken or not, echoes in their conscience louder than any revenge ever could. This is what they never understood. Real strength isn't loud. It doesn't need to announce itself. Real strength is surviving what was meant to destroy you and walking forward with grace without needing to look back. It's being whole, not because life made it easy, but because you chose to stitch yourself back together with truth, with boundaries, with courage. And now you stand, not seeking apologies, not waiting for justice, but fully aware of your worth, rooted in your truth, and surrounded by a peace that can't be taken. Because it wasn't given by them, it was built by you. That's the power they never saw coming. And that's the legacy of your pain, not destruction, but resurrection. The quiet echo, when conscience becomes the voice they can't escape. There is something profoundly haunting about silence, especially when it follows harm. Those who wronged you may walk away with ease in the beginning, convinced that the damage they caused would fade into the background of their lives, forgotten like a chapter they chose to skip. But conscience doesn't work that way. It isn't silenced by distance. It isn't erased by time. In fact, time often sharpens it, because when the noise dies down, when the distractions are gone and they're left alone with their own reflection, your pain begins to speak in a language only their soul can hear. Not with rage, not with curses, not with revenge, but with stillness. A stillness that speaks louder than words. A stillness that follows them into places they once found peace. A stillness that echoes in the corners of their mind where your kindness used to live. You see, conscience doesn't shout, it whispers. But those whispers don't fade. They deepen. They take root. They show up in the moments no one else can see, reminding them not of what you said, but of who they chose to be when they had the power to protect you and instead chose to wound you. And the truth is, the most unbearable hauntings are not external. They're internal. They're the quiet ones, the ones that don't come from your voice, but from their own mind. When someone wounds a good heart, they may not feel the weight immediately. They may laugh, celebrate, convince themselves they were right. But deep within, the soul keeps score. Not with punishment, but with persistent memory. That moment they saw the pain in your eyes and chose to look away. That moment they knew they were crossing a line and did it anyway. Those moments don't disappear. They revisit quietly, consistently. Because no matter how hard someone tries to escape accountability, the truth has a way of making itself known. And it doesn't always need confrontation to do it. Sometimes all it takes is a moment of stillness, a quiet night, a familiar place, a memory that wasn't supposed to sting but suddenly does. That's when it begins, the unraveling, the haunting, not by ghosts, but by choices. It's ironic, isn't it? You wanted to be seen, to be understood, to be valued. You offered love, support, loyalty. You didn't come with demands, only with depth. But they couldn't receive it. Maybe they weren't ready. Maybe they never intended to. Maybe they were so consumed by their own wounds that they projected their fear onto you. But whatever the reason, they walked away with your trust in their hands, and they broke it. And in the beginning, you were the one left in the aftermath. You were the one who cried in silence, questioned your worth, replayed every conversation, wondering what you could have done differently. You carried the weight of their actions like it was your fault. But time has a strange way of flipping the script, because as you began to heal, as you chose to sit with your pain instead of running from it, something shifted. You let go, not because they apologized, but because you refused to let what they did define your future. And that very act, your release, your growth, your peace, is what now speaks to them more powerfully than any confrontation ever could. They don't admit it, most never will, but it shows. In their discomfort when your name is mentioned, in their need to downplay what happened, in their subtle defensiveness when someone praises you. It shows in their silence. Because they know speaking your name is an invitation for truth to enter the room. And truth is something their ego isn't ready to face. Because to acknowledge your worth now is to admit they didn't see it then. And that's the most unsettling realization. Not just that they hurt you, but that they lost someone who was never trying to harm them, only trying to love them. That realization doesn't go away. It lingers. It visits in the places where no one else can see. It becomes a voice they can't mute. A voice that says, you were wrong. Not out of vengeance, but out of undeniable clarity. And that's the difference between you and them. You processed your pain. You grew through it. You bled in silence so you could rise in truth. But them, they ran. They buried. They distracted. And now that unhealed guilt is catching up. Not because you forced it to, but because it was always waiting for them. That's what conscience does. It waits, it watches. And when the lights go down and the masks come off, it speaks. And the more they ignore it, the louder it gets. Not with judgment, but with remembrance, with the weight of everything they could have done differently. And that's the haunting they live with now. Not because you're cursing them, but because the truth doesn't forget. From the ashes, how the broken return with vision. They watched you fall, and in their minds, that was the final scene. They thought the hurt would leave you in pieces too, scattered to gather again. That the betrayal, the loss, the rejection, all of it would blind you to any future beyond the moment of your collapse. Because that's what they expected, paralysis. They expected you to stop moving, to stop believing, to stop becoming. But here's what they didn't know. Some people don't stay broken. Some people rise. And when they do, they rise differently, with new eyes, with a vision shaped by the very pain that tried to destroy them. You didn't come back just to exist. You came back with insight, with wisdom you earned, not from books or theories, but from the battlefield of your own experience. What was meant to cloud your path actually cleared it. What was meant to distract you from your purpose redirected you right into it. You are not who you were before the storm. You're sharper now, not harder, just clearer, not colder, just wiser. The fall didn't end you, it opened your eyes. You see, the breaking wasn't the enemy, it was the beginning. Before it happened, you may have lived in patterns that kept you small. Maybe you were too trusting, too forgiving, too willing to dim your light so others could feel comfortable. Maybe you clung to illusions of who people were, of what love was supposed to look like, of where you thought your life was heading. But pain came and shattered those illusions, and though it broke your heart, it set your vision free. Because once everything you thought you needed is stripped away, you begin to see what truly matters. You begin to see who truly cares. You begin to see what you were made of all along. And that vision, that depth, that awareness, it doesn't come easy. It comes at a cost, but oh, how powerful it is once it's yours. The ones who break and stay broken never realize their potential. But the ones who break and rebuild don't just return, they rise with intention. They walk differently. They love differently. They think differently. You no longer move through the world hoping to be chosen. You choose yourself. You no longer chase what doesn't feed your spirit. You no longer try to fit into places where your presence is merely tolerated. Because now you know not everyone deserves access to your energy, and not every opportunity is aligned with your calling. That's what pain taught you. It cleared the fog. It took away your naivety, yes, but it replaced it with discernment. And now, you're not just surviving, you're seeing. You're seeing what you were blind to before. You're seeing your worth, your strength, your power. You're seeing that sometimes the breaking was the breakthrough. And those who thought they left you in ruins, they're not ready for this version of you. They expected pieces. They expected confusion. They expected silence. But what stands now is a person who not only rebuilt, but redesigned their life with purpose. You didn't just glue yourself back together. You became someone new, someone who no longer lives to prove anything to anyone, someone who understands that vision isn't just about the future. It's about seeing clearly in the present. And now you see through masks, you see through manipulation, you see through empty words. You no longer fall for what once fooled you, because now your pain has become your lens, not your limitation. And make no mistake, this doesn't mean you became emotionless. It means your emotions are now guarded by wisdom. It means your heart still beats with hope, but now that hope is rooted in truth, not fantasy. You're not afraid to love again, but this time you love with your eyes open. You're not afraid to trust, but now you trust with boundaries. You haven't lost your softness. You've just wrapped it in strength. And those who once underestimated you, they feel the shift. They may not speak it, but they notice the way you walk into rooms with quiet confidence. They notice how you no longer react to their games. They notice how your silence has turned from sadness into sovereignty. And it unsettles them, not because you're bitter, but because you're unbothered. Not because you're angry, but because you've outgrown the need for their validation. You've changed. And that change wasn't random. It was earned. Every sleepless night, every tear you wiped alone, every doubt you silenced, every truth you finally accepted, it was all part of the return. And your return is powerful, not because you seek to impress, but because you now live aligned with who you really are. That's what the broken do when they rise with vision. They stop performing. They stop people-pleasing. They stop explaining themselves to people committed to misunderstanding them. And in doing so, they become unshakable. That's you now, no longer stumbling in the dark, but walking forward with eyes that have seen too much to ever be fooled again. And that's what they never saw coming. The broken one becoming the clearest one in the room, the stillness of strength, when healing becomes unmistakable. Healing is not always loud. It doesn't always announce itself with dramatic changes or sudden victories. Often it arrives quietly, so quietly that even you might not notice it first. One day you're simply no longer triggered by what once consumed you. You're no longer obsessed with proving your worth, no longer chasing apologies, no longer waiting for someone to acknowledge the pain they caused. That's when you realize you've healed, not because everything is perfect, not because justice was served, but because your peace is no longer dependent on external validation. And that is unmistakable. It's not a performance. It's not a show for the world to clap for. It's an inner shift, a sacred silence, a calm strength that cannot be faked or fabricated. It's how you carry yourself when no one is watching. It's the softness in your presence that holds a depth others can't quite explain. It's the smile you wear, not the kind that hides pain, but the kind that's been shaped through it. You're not trying to be anything anymore. You just are. That's the quiet power of real healing. And those who once saw you in pieces, they notice it now, even if they don't say a word. Because healing, though quiet, radiates. It shows in your decisions, in your detachment from chaos, in the way you no longer engage with what drains you. It shows in how little you need from people who once had too much power over your emotions. You no longer move to be understood, you move to be aligned. You no longer seek closure from those who benefit from your confusion. Instead, you built your own, piece by piece. And that construction, that sacred invisible work, is what transformed your life from reaction to intention. You've stepped out of survival mode. You're not just getting through the day anymore. You're present, awake, whole, in a way that isn't loud, but deeply, deeply real. And what once held you hostage, their opinions, their silence, their betrayal, no longer change your spirit. Healing doesn't make you forget the pain, it just removes its power. You remember what happened, but it no longer defines you. It no longer dictates your energy. The past becomes a page in your story, not the title of your life. That's the gift you gave yourself when no one else was offering it. That's what makes your journey sacred. You didn't wait for someone to come save you. You became the sanctuary. You became the steady voice in your own storm. You learned to sit with your pain and listen to it, not fear it. You gave it room to speak, and in doing so, it gave you wisdom. That's what real healing is, not erasing the scar, but transforming the wound into insight. And now you walk with a clarity that can't be taught, only earned. And yes, some people will pretend not to notice. They'll act as though you haven't grown. They'll treat you as who you used to be because that version of you was easier for them to control or diminish. But deep down, they feel the shift. They sense the difference. They see the way you carry yourself now, with boundaries, with self-respect, with a quiet elegance that speaks louder than any defense ever could. And it unsettles them. Not because you're bitter, but because you're no longer accessible in the way you once were. You're not available for their projections, for their excuses, for their half-hearted presence. You've outgrown the rooms that couldn't hold you and the people who didn't see you. And you left not with a bang, but with a breath of freedom, a breath of truth. That's healing. That's what it really looks like. And maybe you still have days where the past knocks on your heart. That's okay. Healing isn't a straight line. But what's different now is that those memories no longer paralyze you. They visit and you greet them and then they leave because you're no longer stuck in them. You've made peace with your story. And from that peace, you've created a new path, one that honors what you've been through without being bound by it. You know who you are now. Not because someone told you, but because you met yourself in the middle of the fire and decided you were worth saving. That kind of healing isn't temporary. It doesn't need attention. It doesn't beg to be seen. It is seen by its very essence. And one day, the same people who thought they broke you will look at you and feel something they can't explain, not because you rose with revenge, but because you rose with grace. Because you didn't return to prove a point, you returned because you had more to live for. Because you finally realized that the most powerful revenge is not retaliation, it's resurrection. It's being so at peace with yourself that their absence no longer feels like a loss. That your silence says more than their noise ever could. That your presence is its own kind of justice, quiet, steady, unmistakable. Your peace is their mirror, what they see when you no longer need them. There's something deeply unsettling about watching someone you underestimated step into their peace. Not a fragile peace built on avoidance or denial, but a grounded, unwavering calm that no longer includes the people who once shook it. That's what your silence became, a mirror. Not a weapon, not a threat, but a reflection of everything they refused to face within themselves. Because when you were still fighting for their presence, when you were still trying to make them understand your heart, they had the illusion of control. But now you've released them. You've stopped explaining. You've stopped defending. You've stopped trying to make chaos feel like home. And in doing so, you've created something far more powerful than confrontation. You've created peace. And peace, real peace, is a mirror few can look into without flinching. Because it doesn't just reflect your strength, it reveals their lack of it. You see, when you're no longer angry, no longer emotional, no longer tied to the pain, people can't hide behind their excuses anymore. Your healing exposes their damage. Your growth exposes their stagnation. Your boundaries expose their overreach. They see it not because you pointed it out, but because your absence speaks volumes. You no longer need them to fix what they broke because you've rebuilt without them. And that fact alone rattles something deep inside because they thought you'd never walk away. They thought you'd always come back, always bend, always seek them out to resolve the very wounds they caused. But your peace? It shattered that illusion. You're no longer accessible in the way you once were. And what they didn't realize is that peace doesn't mean indifference, it means release. It means you've finally seen the pattern for what it is and chosen not to repeat it. And that kind of clarity is terrifying to those who depended on your confusion. There's a moment that happens when someone loses control over you, not because you fought back louder, but because you stopped engaging. It's a moment where they're left with nothing but their own reflection. And for people who've spent their lives projecting, deflecting, and blaming, that moment is unbearable because it requires self-awareness, it requires accountability, it requires sitting with the truth that maybe they weren't the hero in your story. Maybe they were the storm you survived. And your peace, the way you now breathe without tension, love without fear, speak without begging, is proof that you were never the problem. That's what stings. That's what haunts them. Because your peace tells the story they've tried to rewrite. And it's not about pride, it's not about revenge, it's not about winning, it's about no longer allowing your life to be a battleground. You don't carry the need to be right anymore. You carry the need to be whole. And wholeness doesn't seek validation from the very hands that tried to break it. It creates a life where validation comes from within. And those who once mistook your softness for weakness now realize they never really knew you. They knew the version of you that was afraid to lose them. They knew the version of you that confused attachment with loyalty. But this version, this peaceful, self-contained, grounded version, they don't know what to do with, because now you're not driven by fear, you're guided by truth. You've accepted what happened, accepted what was lost, and chosen to grow anyway. And that acceptance is your liberation. Your peace is not the absence of conflict. It's the refusal to participate in dysfunction. It's the decision to stop arguing with people who are committed to misunderstanding you. It's the courage to walk away, not with resentment, but with resolve. And that walk, quiet, unannounced, unceremonious, is what echoes in their conscience now. Because the door didn't slam, the bridge didn't burn, You just stopped knocking. You stopped explaining yourself to people who never really listened. You stopped lowering your frequency to be heard in rooms where you were never meant to be understood. And in that stillness, you found something better than closure. You found clarity. Now, your joy unsettles them. Your peace confronts them. Your self-love challenges every lie they told themselves to justify the way they treated you. They see you smiling and wonder how it's possible. They see you thriving and try to convince themselves you're faking it. But deep down, they know. They know that what you've found is real, and it's something they may never touch until they choose to face themselves. That's the power of true peace. It doesn't need to prove itself. It doesn't chase recognition. It simply is. And in its stillness, it becomes the most honest mirror they'll ever see. You didn't become bitter, you became better. You didn't become closed off, you became clear. And now your presence carries a weight they never anticipated, because it reminds them of what they lost, not through tragedy, but through choice. You were the lesson they never thought they'd need to learn. And now your life is the quiet reminder that peace, once found, cannot be stolen back. It only grows stronger in its stillness until it becomes the very thing they can no longer ignore.